Welcome, everyone. We will be getting started in just a minute. While we wait for folks to join the Zoom, just a reminder that today's session will be recorded and sent out this afternoon. All right, welcome to the virtual Happy Half Hour for Friday, February 26th. Our topic today is skills versus process. What does your team need to win 2021? And this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. In fact, all of us here at the Brooks Group, these are conversations that we have with customers every single day in terms of what is the best option for sales teams. So we're excited to bring this insight to you. As we go through today, please feel free, if you have questions, add them to the chat or to the Q&A. We will have some time for Q&A at the end, but we'll also try to address those as we go. I am Michelle Richardson, Vice President of our Sales Performance Research Center here at the Brooks Group. And once again, joined by Russ Scherer, our Director of Sales Strategy Effectiveness. Hi, Russ.
Hi, Michelle. Great to be back. Another 2 weeks has gone by. Hard to believe how quickly the time flies. And I just want to reiterate what Michelle said. A lot of people call and ask us about either skills training or process training and trying to figure out which one. And we've talked in the past about the fact that bad habits have strong muscle memory. And I'd say the two kind of key areas that we've seen this in, and we'll touch on it today, is first of all, there was a great tendency of people when COVID started, and even now to resist being able to learn the tools to sell virtually. Clearly a skill that's been needed. And then we're also hearing a lot of stories from the clients that I work with where their competitors are just going low on price, that they think the best way to win is just quickly drop to the lowest price and get the order off the street. And that kind of habit or skill is not something that's going to be easily overcome. It's going to be something that hangs with those companies and those competitors for a long time. So as we put this together, I enjoyed the research and talking about kind of how we move to skills and process. And as always, Michelle has some interesting data that starts kind of looking at it from the buyer's perspective and the challenges that we face or they face going forward with that. And then I'll take a quick walk through, and I'm going to kind of spoil the punchline here. The answer is you may need both, but we'll give you a diagnostic tool and some questions around whether right now I should be focusing on skills or whether right now I should be focusing on process. So, Michelle, you want to kick us off with what you found from a data perspective?
Absolutely. And you do raise a really good point, Russ, in terms of the spoiler being skills versus process, probably both. They're so intertwined that really there's kind of, can't have one without the other to a certain extent. So let's take a look at the data. This is data from Gartner and their Chief Sales Officer Journal for Q1 2021. So this is brand new, hot off the presses. They have published some research results on how the virtual environment is impacting frontline sellers. And this data reflects more than 500 sellers. And these are challenges that were articulated and surfaced by sellers. And what I want to do is kind of talk you through this, but also as a sales leader, if you're hearing these challenges from your team, how to drill down and determine what the skill issue or potentially the process issue is that's driving these challenges. What's the root cause? So 59% of sellers said that gaining access to stakeholders virtually was their greatest challenge. So think about this. How well do your sellers differentiate in their prospecting to inspire stakeholders to meet with them? Prospecting is a huge issue that we hear about quite frequently. It's not only a skill, it's technically, and at least in our perception, the first step of the sales process. So do your sellers bring value in that part of the process that really compels stakeholders and decision makers to want to meet with them? 38%, almost 39%, said bringing buying groups together virtually was a challenge. So again, from a skill perspective, how well do they manage? Do your sellers manage their decision makers in a virtual setting? So whether they've got them all together there in the Brady Bunch window on Zoom, whether they are interacting in smaller groups throughout the process, that multi-threaded selling, as Russ likes to refer to it, where they're dealing with multiple individuals, oftentimes at different stages of the process. So almost 33% have said that navigating consensus of a purchase decision with a buying group virtually is a challenge. And we know that most B2B decisions now, buying decisions, are committee-based, or at least more than one person involved. So there is some consensus driving involved. So do your sellers ask enough questions? Do they do a thorough discovery to understand different stakeholder priorities? Can they weave those priorities together and present a coordinated solution and present in a virtual environment? And this really actually holds true even in a face-to-face, but can they weave those priorities together in a coordinated solution that really does help drive consensus and bring decision makers together? And I thought this one was very interesting. Almost 29% of sellers say they have a challenge with the lack of customer confidence when making purchase decisions in a virtual environment. So from the seller perspective, what are those skills and where does that fall in the process? So can sellers present a recommendation? Can they demonstrate ROI in such a way that your customer feels comfortable moving forward? Can they manage objections and negotiations? Can they offer proof and validation so that when they ask for the business, the customer feels no hesitation when saying yes? And in this group, about 20% said they faced no customer-facing challenges. So that's a sales team we all want to be on right now. So that's the seller perspective. Now, let's take a look at the buyer perspective. So we've talked about the data on the impact of seller challenges, how that connects to skills. And really what we saw on the seller side was walking through an entire process with skills at each stage. But let's put ourselves in the buyer's shoes right now, or if you're selling virtually, put on their slippers and let's take a walk in their shoes. So this is data from Showpad. Showpad is a sales enablement technology firm. It's data from 2018. I think it holds true, if not maybe even magnified in our current environment, and it reflects more than 600 B2B buyers. So they surveyed B2B buyers on their buying experience. So these are factors that their respondents had slowed down their last B2B purchase. 32% of buyers said there was not enough information available. Another almost 37% said not enough information available that was applicable to their purchase. 29% almost had difficulty demonstrating ROI. Almost 21% did not trust the information they found. And 27% said the information was confusing. So there's a real opportunity here. This is from the buyer perspective. And if you think back to what the sellers were saying they were having challenged with, there's a little bit of an overlap here. There's a real opportunity for sellers throughout the process to be able to provide tailored, accurate insights to demonstrate ROI, to really pull out the customer's definition of value and help them feel confident in their purchases. And so within this same study, internally, these same buyers reported that as they were working together internally, they reported their own disagreements over price, ROI, and product capabilities, and that also slowed down the internal process. So again, there's really an opportunity for the seller to demonstrate skills throughout the sales process to move the deal along and again, instill confidence and accuracy in the purchase.
Michelle, if I could just add to that, we've seen data from HubSpot, I believe, that reinforces these with slightly different words. HubSpot would tell you that buyers are frustrated that presentations are too generic, that salespeople don't listen, And I think that directly ties to that number one, not enough information applicable to my purchase, as well as difficulty showing ROI, because the
Right.
more generic the solution that's presented, the more work either the buyer has to do or the more disconnect there is between the value you bring and the value experience. So that clearly is a tie.
Exactly, exactly. And we also know from previous virtual happy half hours and data that we've presented, we know that ROI, the need to present ROI or show ROI is much greater right now. Budgets are tighter. So it's an important skill. It's really important for the salesperson, again, to be able to really tailor that experience to their buyers. We are sponsored this week by our virtual boot camp. So as we talk about skills versus process, our virtual boot camp is really designed to give your sales team some targeted skills for selling in a virtual environment. So we will talk about things such as reducing virtual stress, capturing prospects with powerful first impressions, using technology to create compelling recommendations and presentations. How do you get your customer to turn their webcam on? So really targeted skills sprinkled throughout the sales process. It's 4 sessions. I believe that the first session starts in April. If you are interested in some virtual boot camp skill enhancements around virtual selling, please feel free to email us at contact@thebrooksgroup.com. If you're also interested in skills and process, we will also be offering this in combination with our live impact selling workshop that starts in June, I believe, or it's coming this summer. We'll be doing the virtual boot camp in combination with our impact selling program.
And Michelle, I just add that virtual by this definition does not mean video. Virtual means all of the tools we now have available to us. So we work on phone, we work on how do you use email and text. So anything that's not face-to-face, physically in person, becomes a part of the selling skills we talk about. And if you're wondering, like, does that really apply to me or not? Go ahead and drop the invite, send the email to contact@the_Brooks Group. We can get you a copy of the agenda and sort of the key topics that are covered. And that might be a better way than just choosing off the title, if you will, of the workshop.
A great point, Russ. And I have seen some of this content. It is super useful, but find out for yourself. Email us and let us send you some information on that. All right, Russ, let's talk about skills and process.
All right, well, let's start with a clear definition. So I went to dictionary.com. They define a skill as the ability coming from one's knowledge, practice, aptitude, etc., to do something well. And I would say that technically the well part is a qualifier, because we can have skills that we're bad at as well. If you've ever seen my golf game, you'll recognize that. And then a process is a systematic set of actions or steps, if you will, that are directed towards some end. And so it means that if you think of a process as a unit of work, the skills inside of them are things that you do. And you might use that skill in multiple steps. For example, good listening skills need to be used throughout the selling process. And as I started to put this together, I thought of this sort of classic Lucy Ethel comedy from the Chocolate Factory, or it turns out it's a candy factory, is the way it's described online. If you haven't seen it, go to YouTube. I watched it again for the first time in many years because, yes, it even predates me, but I think most people know it. And it defines this, right? The process is easy. The supervisor who's there in the middle describes it at the beginning of the clip. She says, the candy passes through on a conveyor belt and continues into the next room where it will be packed. So Lucy and Ethel's job are to pick up a piece of candy, wrap it in paper, and place it back on the conveyor belt. That's the process: produce, wrap, package. It's a 3-step process. What makes this so funny and where it falls apart is the skill area. They can't get the candies, wrap them, and put them back on the conveyor belt fast enough. And that's what creates sort of the comic genius of this particular piece. And it really helps illustrate the fact that you can have a great process and your skills let you down, or you may have some holes in your process that need to be picked up before the skills are there. For example, you might have too many or too few leads. You might do poor qualifying on the right number of leads and therefore lose opportunities. Or my favorite that I see as a skill issue, which is really a process issue, is you get down to the end of the period, the last week of the month, so to speak, and all of a sudden you have too few opportunities ready to close. And so you have to bend over and do crazy things from a giveaways perspective or a price reduction perspective to get customers to move. And we train our customers very quickly to wait for that. And we pay the price for giving away that margin, if you will. If you don't believe me, watch the commercials. The last week of the month, every car dealership has made a mistake with buying. Every RV dealership has way too much inventory, and now you can take advantage of it. So let's look at the reality of the situation. The reality is that most organizations that I have either worked with or worked for have a room to improve, both in terms of skills and in terms of process. McKinsey reports in a recent study that the vast majority of their buyers expect that digital interactions are going to be 2 to 3 times more important post-pandemic than they were before the pandemic. That because it gives the buyer more power to get the information when they want it, lets them know when and how to process that information. And it fits with sort of this general trend that we're seeing of the consumerization or the B2C influence on the B2B buying process. We're also finding right now that prospecting virtually is harder. In the past, the top areas where people gain prospects were wandering trade shows, attending association meetings, walking into a physical office, even doing a lunch and learn where they bring in lunch in exchange for being able to present what their product or services is. And these events are either shut down or limited now and may be limited for quite a while going into the future. These new skills that people need to be able to help the salesperson think through this process of how do I reach out? How do I make an offer that's going to grab their attention with real value? And especially, how do I build rapport and trust over a phone or over video? A lot of people say it can't be done. I would argue that if you think about hostage negotiators, they have to establish a relationship and rapport with the hostage taker if they're going to get anything done. So it can be done. It's just a new set of skills. One of the things we're seeing, for example, and we teach in our programs, is the better use of social media. How do I make the right contacts? How do I start the conversation in a way that's both going to allow dialogue and get me positioned as somebody who can help? So that's the pro skill side. The pro process side kind of comes from it as a, what's important to the buyers. We've shared this before that McKinsey says buyers are increasingly attracted to vendors who can offer speed, transparency, and expertise. And what's interesting is that unless you've defined a process, you're not going to be able to improve your speed or your transparency probably. And your expertise is going to be delivered in an unbalanced or maybe inconsistent way. So buyers are saying, we want our vendors to have better process. And then I love a recent Gartner study that talked about the fact that as we move from the in-person to the virtual, we've got to rethink the materials that we use. Where a data sheet or a corporate brochure used to be great when we were there in person, now those need to be made for virtual delivery. Messaging has to be tighter because people won't scroll through a 12-page PDF like they might flip through a 12-page brochure. They want the messages more focused on individual customers because we can do that since we don't have to print or hit certain print minimums. And they want to make sure that we use audio and video as a part of that. Let's face it, we have a society that moves more towards that kind of characteristics. And even salespeople who have for a long time sold on charisma like to be able to use their voice and their picture more to, again, bring some of that charisma, call it e-charisma, if you will, to virtual selling. And I would argue that you can't map your materials into the selling system unless you have a process. So like we said, it's a little bit of both. So how do you diagnose where the biggest problem is? Well, let me walk you through a diagnostic that I use with companies to help them understand. The first thing is we start at the end of the process because that's what everyone says. They either have revenue that's too low, they have margins that don't hit. A lot of times we'll also hear that I don't have enough leads, but we'll work our way back through that process. It's what we call an end of process because by the time we know that we have this issue, it's too late really in a lot of cases to do anything. And so I start working my way backwards through a set of questions. The first question I'll look at in either of these is, do I have issues around negotiation or objection handling? In other words, are deals being lost because my salesperson can't get through the negotiation successfully? Do they not know how to make the right trade-offs that protect margin? Or maybe are they weak at objection handling, which causes them not to be able to clear a stumbling block for the buyer to move forward? Or maybe they feel like they have to give in order to win. Both of those can attack my revenue line and my margin line. I had a client that I worked with a few years ago that they gave final pricing flexibility to their salespeople to set the price within a certain range, and even compensated them based on where the final price for the equipment came in. And what they found when we did some studying is that 90+% of their people always entered that transaction with the absolute lowest price they could, because they thought that was the fastest way to get the transaction done. They hadn't done enough value building, and so they tried to get it done quickly, and they had no room to move when the pressure finally came on that price. So we look at things like, what's the average, and then what's the min and the max on the opportunities you win? Do you have one or two of your folks that are out of balance, or is the entire sales team seems to have issues in negotiation and objections? If we don't see an issue there, we'll back up further in the funnel. We'll ask ourselves the question, what's the conversion rate from when you're doing a proposal, you're making recommendations, to wins? We saw some data this week that said that as many as 4 in 10 buyers start a process and never get to the purchase. Some of this likely is maybe around the idea of you're not clearly communicating or not aligning values, as Michelle said earlier. And part of it goes back to what our founder, Bill Brooks, said, which is a confused buyer never buys anything. So the sales rep gets ghosted and the deal disappears. And so you ask yourself the question, can my salespeople clearly share why they should win the deal and why they shouldn't? I find in working with folks that they can almost always explain why they should win, but they struggle with this idea of, why won't I win this? And until you understand that, you really don't understand the full range, the full scope of value. Then we'll back up one more step and ask the question, how well do they really understand what value they bring? Not generically that I bring as a company, but what's going to really happen in this transaction that's of value? Did they ask good questions to uncover what the buyer really is looking for? Or did they just rush through it so they could start talking about their product or service? Did they listen well? Or were they so locked into a solution and thinking that the next, all they could think of was the next closed-ended question, something like, well, of course you'd want a US manufacturer, correct? Who's going to answer that question other than yes? And as a result, maybe it's important, maybe it's not. You get the idea. Backing up all the way to the beginning, and in the other 2 steps, we won't go into them as much detail, but has the person built rapport and real trust? Or is it just a pseudo relationship where the buyer's commitment is really just to ask the rep for a lower price no matter what it is? Do the salespeople know enough about their industry and about the prospect? In other words, if a salesperson walked in and asked me, what do you do here? It's almost an immediate disqualifier. Or this week, I got an email over LinkedIn that said, hey, we help manufacturing companies like yours be successful. And I thought, I'm not a manufacturing company. And especially when they were trying to sell me a lead generation service, I thought, if they can't get it right in their own business, how are they going to get it right for me? It gets salespeople thrown out the door. And then ultimately, are your salespeople prospecting? Are they calling the right accounts or the wrong accounts? Are they prepared when they get on the phone or they get that email? Are they investing some of that time that used to be spent on the road into gaining more leads? Or are they frustrated because they've lost their best sources of leads and therefore keep falling back into, I just can't make leads happen? Now, you can do this set of diagnostics. You can work through these set of questions, even if you don't have a formal sales process, because in general, the basic steps tend to be the same across any kind of a sales engagement. But the last question that you ask does require a process. And that is every salesperson on my team doing all of the same steps every time? Or do they kind of wing it? Do they kind of act like improv comedians where they try to just sort of act off whatever the customer said next? And as a result of that, they tend to fail. And by the way, if you'd like us to walk through this diagnostic with your team, we'd be glad to set up a phone conversation. You can send an email to that contact@thebrooksgroup.com and just say something about diagnostic, and we'll set up a call to spend some time and help you work through kind of where you might be able to see some improvement in either your skills or your processes. And then finally, what are the questions that we need to ask as we work through this? Here's the 5 that I asked. Number 1, did or do you practice selling consistency? If you're inconsistent in the way in which you sell, then process is probably what you need. Have you defined your key problem? Do you know what it really is that you're trying to solve? What's the variable you're looking for? Could be either process or skills based at that point. Number 3, can you trace the issue back to where it's occurring? Sort of where in the conversation, from initial conversation to close, are you not being successful in conversion to the next part of the step? Are you looking at the end process results, or are you looking in process, as we call it, to see where you could improve? In process, a lot of things tend to be skills based. Do you have a standard metric that you can measure against? Number 4. And if so, what % of your team are achieving it? If you believe that for every meeting you have, you get a 50% conversion into proposals, what's your team average? Again, what's the min and the max? Is it a problem with a portion of your team, or is everybody coming up short? Again, this is likely a skills issue. And then the last one I would say is the issue that I'm facing a can't do or a won't do issue, which takes us outside the whole area around process. Is there something that's keeping the person from doing their job? If it's a can't do issue, it tends to be skills. They don't know how to prospect. They don't know how to present the customer, to the customer, the value of your company. They don't know how to ask for the business. But there's also a series of won't do's. And we have a series of assessments that we walk people through to learn about fit with the job, the alignment of the reward structure that you've put together with their individual motivations. Even if there's a specific area that may be on a temporary or permanent basis made them unclear or unaware of key personal skills that they need. Maybe that drive to get out of bed in the morning and make things happen. Maybe it's their ability to collaborate. Maybe it's their ability to really trust other people as a part of that process. If this is the case, it's probably not skills, it's probably not process. But again, there's assessment tools that allow you to help with that. Well, that's kind of the quick overview of is it skills or is it process, and the quick diagnostic in terms of being able to work through your organization to understand. At this point, let me just pause and ask, are there any questions that you'd like us to address, or anything that we can help you with as you think about sort of skills and process? Tell us what's going on in your organization. How broadly and quickly has your team embraced selling skills, and where do they need help?
Feel free to enter those questions or comments either in the Q&A or the chat feature of the webinar.
One of the things that we're seeing is a lot of times when people think of video, they think of something like Zoom or increasingly like Teams. But there's another form of video that you can use as well, a couple of forms. One is just the person-to-person, like a FaceTime kind of case, or a Google Duo, Skype, maybe an app like WhatsApp. All of those can be individual person-to-person and much easier for salespeople to pull off. And then we're also seeing some use of different tools to send video emails. Again, it cuts through, it makes it different. And companies like Soapbox or Vidyard, there's an app called Boom Boom, different price points. Some of them have free versions, some don't. But that's also a skill that people are working through. We've got a comment here around the idea of needing some financial acumen. And I absolutely agree with that. You've got to be able to train your people on their particular industry. And that also is a skills issue, and one I should have probably mentioned. It becomes one of those things that you assess as you go through it. If between the initial contact and they're not either getting the meetings or the meetings aren't turning into proposals, usually means you've got some kind of a knowledge gap in the organization. And somebody who says the biggest challenge is keeping people motivated and assertive with follow-up. Great point. We're hearing from a number of people that both motivation as well as follow-up are complicated. One of the things we see is there's some generational differences in that. And I would assess most of those around those skills, how to use the variety of tools you've got. In other words, if all you're doing is sending emails, you need to vary it. You need to move into something that's got some voice. Maybe it's a video email. Maybe you need to do a summary after the meeting from a follow-up perspective, where everybody uses one of these video tools and records a short summary that says, hey, here's the highlights or the things we focused on in the meeting and the action items that came out. The way in which we can get them to take varieties is good. Again, we've talked about this before, but peer-to-peer relationships, if you have folks at different level of technology in your organization, maybe different experience levels, pairing them up and asking them to teach each other, one on follow-up and one on how to use the various tools is a good way to do that. I also saw this week, and again, not to promote a particular company, but Vidyard did a webinar, and they showed some of their videos. An individual was selling packaging, I believe, and actually shot a video that showed, hey, we bought a box of your materials, we unwrapped, and here's all the material that you had in the box before, and then here's how much material we would have. And it was like 15% of this entire stretch. And they used that video very powerfully to communicate their value proposition and used it in prospecting ahead of that first conversation. So again, think about how to be creative from those perspectives. A picture really can be worth 1,000 words or more. Incentive plans impact the integrity of the sales process. Absolutely, great question. I think what's important is, I'm trying to figure out the best way to articulate this. We see it with certain clients who live with either trials or demos. If there's a key milestone, either in the way in which you report on an opportunity or in which you might pay for an opportunity built around demos or trials, you see people rush through the qualification and immediately get to that demo or trial. They're so focused on that they forget to find the value piece. I also think that that incentive plans can cause people to try and rush through them if they're, for example, paid solely on the basis of the transaction. But I don't think that in that case it's necessarily bad. I think it's just getting the person to understand that in order to maximize their compensation, because that's why they'd rush through the process, they really need to focus in on doing all of those steps well. I had a client one time say to me, what has the customer done in order to earn a demonstration? What have you learned from them? What are they really looking for so that you can zero in and make that happen? So don't just make it a milestone. Use it as a key to value delivery capability. Buyer contacts disappearing. Absolutely. And the person left a question here around the idea of only having one contact per plant. And so sometimes there's a skill needed to make sure that you're mapping into more people in that organization. Who are the peers? And there's some things you can do that bring both wider and vertically integrated management into those meetings and reactions. A lot of times salespeople, for example, stop selling too soon. They do all the work to gather the information and then just drop the proposal in via email and never hear from the customer again. Other times they go in with a strong value proposition, they deliver, and then they never do the follow-up to report on how they did. And you can guarantee the customer's looking at it and thinking, well, I was promised X, did it occur? Sales teams need to be involved in making sure that they're through the value delivery process. And if they came above plan, that's great. They should be talking about it. If they came below plan, should be talking about why, and work with the customer to help them be able to understand and generate that. Great questions. Thank you very much for those. Well, we are past time. So again, if you have a question that comes up, go ahead and chat it. Let me just finish up. What do we do? Make sure you clearly understand what the problem is at the end of the process. Then work your way. First, ask the question: do I sell consistently? Can I look to see that we're doing the same thing every time, or have I got a bunch of improv comedy going on. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's not. Can you trace back that core issue to a particular part in the sales process or the sales journey, or is it a skill that's there? Look to see if it's a can't do or a won't do issue. If it's can't, deal with it from skills training. If it's won't, from an assessment perspective. Make sure you've got a really clear success metric. I was working with a client not long ago who had very clear metrics and wanted to accelerate the number of leads they were generating, but found that they were so congested downstream that more leads would have just lowered all of their metrics. So understand that that in any kind of process, there's a flow. There's a great book on constraint theory called The Goal, I believe is what it's called. But if you're looking for kind of that whole broader process and you're a high theoretical and want to learn, it's a great book. And then last one, make sure you're really kind of focused in on the core issue. Don't focus on the symptoms, but instead work on where you really see the ability to have leverage in your sales results. Our next meeting is going to be March 12th, which turns out to be National Girl Scout Day and Alfred Hitchcock Day. I was crazy into research.
How do we compete with that?
Well, I don't, not Girl Scout Cookie Day, just Girl Scout Day. And we're going to look at how we do it. We're going to look inside how the marketing and sales process at the Brooks Group and how the skills we use have had to change as we go through COVID. So kind of an own internal case study. So we look forward to sharing that with you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And again, if you're interested in more information on virtual bootcamp, email us at contact@thebrooksgroup.com. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.